Rami, the name dropping that you're doing is just too beautiful a segue to resist to get into the DEI portion of this conversation. You just talked about people who are instrumental in deal making and execution, and I believe the names you rattled off were Cindy, Miriam, and Eileen, none of which sound like middle-aged white dudes.
No, they are not middle-aged white dudes. They're incredible leaders in their own right, irrespective of what their names might suggest. But obviously, they're very strong women as well.
When you, so I want to get into the meat of this conversation about your commitment to DEI and the value that it brings Arcellx. When you joined the company, you talked about the people being one of the differentiators that helped you turn the corner. You talked, was it the Super Seven?
That's right.
The super
Very good memory, man.
the Super
Yeah.
Seven, the Super Seven scientists. When you sat back and you looked at the landscape of leadership and down, right? Leadership and through middle management and into the lab, whatever size the company was when you joined it. Were you immediately impressed with the diversity of perspectives and cultures, or were you more like there's some room for improvement here?
Yeah, I would say mostly impressed. I felt like the broader company was fairly diverse, and you have to. One thing we didn't talk about is the company was predominantly in Maryland. I sit here in Northern California, and we now have a California office as well. The Maryland office has only grown since I've joined, but we've also grown a presence here. And so I would say like the company is only about 30 people, and it was mostly a scientific team. And I would say within that scientific team, the diversity was pretty strong. I would say even the management team was pretty good, but obviously there was always some room to grow and from there, and we've certainly done that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were going to grow. You're 130 plus people now, so the growth was inevitable. And I want to get into some detail around how you make choices and decisions in that growth. But I guess the fundamental question that I don't want to just skip over is why. When you sat back and you looked and you're like, yeah, you know what, it's a team of brilliant minds, and they're brilliant minds who are diverse. That's important to me. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get that question all the time. I think if I can go back a little bit, why is diversity so important to me? I think part of it is the experience I had growing up. I had a really strong mom, and she was an entrepreneur, and she kind of broke the mold in a lot of different ways. And so as I kind of reflect on it, I think a big part of my makeup is just not having instilled a bias where I didn't feel like women can't do incredible things entrepreneurially, leadership wise, and so on. And so I felt like that was pretty formative for me. But in my personal experiences, I'm pretty competitive and obsessive with winning. And so once I got into a position where I was hiring people, I just wanted to hire the best person. And so interestingly, I think the first three people I ever hired in my career were all women, not because I set out to hire women, but because I set out to hire the very best people. And what I found through that experience is that when you hire diverse leaders in particular, you don't have to have a lot of policies and bureaucracy to drive diversity. That example you set tends to propagate throughout the organization and sort of is self-realizing. So I would say, and I'm sure you probably want more, but the highest level, I think some combination of my formative experience and my professional experiences early on reinforce that diversity was a pathway to success. And that's only grown as time has passed.
Yeah. Did it start with sort of that, I guess, that formative experience, having a strong entrepreneurial mom, and then growing through through your schooling and your Wharton MBA and your early entrepreneurial experience, like sort of experience, anecdote, and intuition? And I asked that question because like I could, if I wanted to, I could jump on Google right now and I could pull up stats that point to, you know, facts, right? Statistics that point to the value of multiple perspectives multiple cultural and gender perspectives on a specific business. In our case, biotech, perhaps like, patient centricity. What's the value of having a diverse team when it comes to patient centricity? Different cultures, different genders receive and accept therapeutic opportunities in different ways. So like there are people who do research on this stuff, right? And maybe some of that came later. I'm just curious, like if there came a point where you're like, I can kind of codify this strong belief and intuition that I have, and I need to maybe or should.
No, I mean, look, now you're throwing the segues in my direction. I think that was the next evolution. And as you know, I have a TEDx talk on the topic, but somewhere around 2016 or thereabouts, I just happened to read a lot of research on this topic. And to use your word, I kind of codified it into a talk that I just used internally within my last company, which is, here's my perspective on diversity. I think it's worked really well experientially, but here's the research that backs up all this experiential stuff and why we should be leaning into it. And that's where I got the actual nudge from my teammates to say, hey, we'd really love to share this talk with our friends and our families. And so when I had time a couple of years later, I actually did it as a TEDx talk so that it can be shared kind of more broadly. But yeah, there's a ton of research that organizations with women on their boards tend to outperform across nearly every financial metric. Even papers written by diverse authors, and in this case, it's more ethnic diversity, tend to outperform from an impact factor and citation perspective. So we can certainly get into all of that, but there is no shortage of research that backs us up. So I would say, yeah, I think the sort of flow is that I think this was certainly informed by my formative years. It developed through intuition and experience professionally, and then it was cemented through research that really mirrored and supported those first two positions. And now I'm in much more of a position to, I don't know if evangelize is the right word, but certainly to be pretty vocal about it amongst other topics, because I do really believe that it is beyond the right thing to do. It is a massive competitive advantage, particularly as it relates to gender equity. And it's something that not enough companies take advantage of. And in fact, I get called from companies big and small to talk on the topic, to consult on helping, figure out how they can improve their diversity and their retention. And so it's something I've been pretty passionate about and certainly invested a lot of effort into.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a few follow-ups on that. I'm going to start with a comment that you made earlier around that kind of alluded to building the concept and executing on the concept into the culture of the company without doing it in sort of an overt way. I mean, you can, if you wanted to, you could have Tuesday talks, right? You could do workshops, right? Like you could bring consultants in and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's a great starting point for companies who are not as convicted on the concept perhaps as Arcellx is. But the way you paint it, it's more of a story of just naturally sort of weaving the acceptance and belief in this into the culture. And I'm curious, like, without a roadmap, how that happens. Does it begin to happen at the board and C-suite level and just sort of matriculate, through the management and down levels? Like what's sort of the, I don't know. I don't know if I'm asking.
How does the magic happen?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm asking for a formula or, I mean, there's got to be obviously reinforcement and there's got to be some degree of formality.
Yeah, I would say it is. I think your intuition is right. It is a bit of a mix. I think there's an element of one, because it is a topic that is important to me. I probably, without realizing it, talk about it more than most, right? Mm. And it is not in a forced way, like you're saying, in terms of like, holding talks about it or so on, but we'll be in a debrief. We'll have interviewed, say, and this is a real example, two candidates, finalist candidates, a male and a female, and we'll go through the debrief, and I'll hear things like the male candidate has more technical experience, or they have more of this or more of that. And I'll look at the resumes and say, curiously, it seems like the female candidate actually has more technical experience. So why do we think we're saying that? Is that a bias that we're expressing through the interview process? And so, by being informed enough, particularly as the leader in the organization, to sort of bring these topics up when they come up, right? Again, not in a forced way, but in an organic way. I think that's one thing that opens people's eyes. It's educational and it helps us make better decisions. Also, it's important to me in the sense that I don't look at any just individual role. I look at the composition of our management team. And so there are some points where I've said, look, I'd really like to get a woman in this particular role. Now, if you, I don't know if you're familiar, I used this joke recently because I had a trip to Costa Rica where I learned about this wonderful creature called the Jesus Christ lizard. Are you familiar with the Jesus Christ lizard?
I'm not.
It is called the Jesus Christ lizard because it literally runs on water. And so this is going to get into a deeper point that is really important. So I will say to the recruiter, look, my goal or desire is to get a woman in this role. Now, if you get a man that is a Jesus Christ lizard, that I will happily interview them. But what I interestingly find, because you brought up DEI, and it's one of these things that is infuriatingly under attack for reasons that have nothing to do with DEI, in my opinion. But one of the core arguments against DEI is we have to lower the bar to actually hire diverse people, when in fact, we actually need to maintain the bar. Because what actually happens in my experience is that if you are no offense to you, Matt, you're a great guy, but if you are a middle-aged white guy, you are more likely to get a job, not because you're exceptional, but because of the virtue of privilege over time accumulating to that. You have gotten experience that maybe have put you in better positions, even though you're not bad, but you're maybe not the most exceptional candidate. So what I say is, like, let's actually keep the bar high across the board, right? We're only going to hire exceptional people. And by doing that, I've actually found that I've hired a fairly diverse team rather than this conception that we're lowering the bar for diverse folks. Because in fact, diverse people generally have to outperform in order to get the role, right? They have to really stand out to overcome the bias, to overcome the lack of privilege, to overcome the limitations that they often face. So to the point where they're getting into these leadership positions and conversations, they're actually quite exceptional. So what I say is, like, let's keep the bar high, right? Let's keep it high for both candidates, and let's see who can actually clear that bar. And look, I've obviously hired all sorts of folks, including white folks, brown folks, black folks, diverse, religiously diverse, ethnically, American, not American. And so I found that just keeping the bar high, you actually get a fairly diverse team across the board without actually having to necessarily prescribe it. I'll get off my soapbox, but this is I think, a really important point.
Rami, when you leaned forward and started using your hands, I was thinking, oh, now we're getting into the good stuff. No, you get on the soapbox and stay there. It makes me curious, though, when you talk about maintaining the bar height, looking for exceptional first and foremost. It begs the question around supply, right? Like, are you creating challenges? Is it more challenging for you? Are you creating challenges that perhaps cause some friction or pushback with your shareholders around saying, okay, like, we're going to maintain the bar. Exceptional is requirement number one. Requirement number 1.25 is diversity, perhaps, right? We're gonna make that a goal. Is the perception that the supply of female, as an example, or minority, as an example, pick minority, is the perception that the supply of those people into this business with the technical capacities to be exceptional, that supply is low, right? Like, you go back to what's going on in grade school and high school and college to encourage STEM, in the female population. that not being enough to maintain supply of exceptionalism in female and minority candidates.
You know, what's interesting is that if your bar is exceptional, these searches are going to take time anyway. Now, you know, people will perceive, hey, it's taking time because you're also trying to get a woman. But the reality is that if you're trying to get exceptional people, that always takes time. I would say that one, the results are there. So I think the system works, right? Like if you do hire exceptional people, you get diverse people, and those diverse people lead to better results. So I think it depends on what people's time frame is. If your time frame is you're in it for the long term and you want long-term growth and success, it's worth that. To me, it's worth the investment in time. The other thing is you have to be prepared to counter the bias that is intrinsic in this particular thread, which is that I'll meet with a recruiter and say what I said earlier, like, listen, I would love to really hire a woman or a minority or whatever it is in this particular role. And they will say, well, that's going to be hard because the pool is constrained. And I'll say, well, I've already done a search and there are X number of people that I found myself that fit that mold. And so, you know, it's not impossible, right? We can agree it's not impossible. It's going to be harder, but that's why you got to earn your paycheck, right? If you're not willing to do that, then it's like, what am I hiring you for? Because I can find regular people that are close to the office myself. So I think it does take a little bit of, maybe a little bit of more legwork, a little bit more of challenging, a little bit more holding people accountable. But I would say the results are well worth it.
Yeah. Curious about the impact of that commitment on sort of the organizational build out, like a biotech. There are trends in terms of hiring certain positions at certain points in the timeline, whether it's clinical timeline, development timeline, whatever. Like you get to a point where like, we're going to need a regulatory expert. We're going to need a legal expert very early on. Later in the game, we're going to need commercial expertise, market expertise. So you need to time that correctly in correlation with your timeline. It sounds to me like perhaps there's got to be at least some conscious proactivity at Arcellx around, we may be signing ourselves up for a protracted recruiting phase here for this particular candidate. Do you have to be conscious of that and work that into sort of the hiring cadence calculus?
It's funny. It's just not even something we think about or has had any kind of impact. I'll tell you where it's most acute is when in your leadership hires. Like I think it took me about a year to hire my CFO, who I really was focused on hiring an exceptional, diverse person. But in a position like that, it's well worth it, right? If it takes you an extra 2-3 months or whatever it is, like if you do a search like that and you really want someone exceptional, it's going to take some time anyhow, just based on availability of people and number of people who are qualified and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the day-to-day of like filling this role or that role, it's really not, it's not come up as an issue at all or a consideration. Part of it is like, if you're going to do this, you really need to build like an exceptional talent organization. And it won't surprise you, but that's also led by a woman, Michelle Greer, who is exceptional, our head of talent. I think you build for it. Like what you can't say is, look, I want exceptional people and I want them to be diverse ideally, but I'm not willing to invest in having exceptional talent people. I'm not willing to invest in having an exceptional management team that helps draw out that talent. I'm not willing to invest my own personal time in doing that. I'm not willing to invest in the resources of maybe paying for the search firm to do it. I think that's the challenge. If people, this is a deeper conversation about strategy, but one of the core, if you go read Michael Porter or you study strategy, one of the core concepts of strategy is fit, right? Even if you have a bunch of activities that you're good at, but they don't really fit together, you're not likely to realize a lot of success. So in this same sort of vein, like you can't just take an organization that is ill fit for diversity, and we should talk about inclusion too, because that's the other core element, and just say, look, we've decided tomorrow to hire a diverse team. But if your organization isn't uniformly exceptional, you don't have a strong talent team, and your management team isn't diverse, that a diverse person will want to join that team, then you're not likely, just by making a decision to suddenly transform the organization. It's like the whole organization has to be purpose built to do this. And if it is, then it's really like, it's not something we honestly think about, right? It just happens organically, and we meet our timelines and our growth, and it's just great.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. You mentioned earlier also that you use the words massive competitive advantage in relation to the diversity that's on display at Arcellx. How do you know?
I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, as they say, Matt. I think you have been remarkably generous in your description of what we've been able to accomplish. And this isn't my first rodeo. We've been able to do this at least twice now, where I've seen the direct results of these incredible people really kind of change the business and change the world. And so that's on the macro level. I think the results are evident. I mean, it's clear that I'm not doing everything myself here. We've got a great team that's doing a lot, and I mentioned some of those folks already. But I would say on a more micro basis, you mentioned this earlier, but I will tell you the interactions within the company and even across teams are so much better and different because of the diversity we have. I would say that because the management team in particular is diverse, the policies and everything, the decisions you make create a more inclusive and inviting environment that allow us to also then build on that and hire more diverse, exceptional people across the board. So I would say you can see it in the results, you can feel it in the environment. I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about is both how incredibly diverse Arcellx is, but also like how much recognition we've gotten for that and how much recognition historically my organizations have gotten for that. It's not just even the business performance, but it's the environment that you create, the joy people take in their work, and how much that influences your ability to continue to get more and more exceptional talent.